God is saying to you today, the more you trust God, the more He amazes you. God will give you strength when you think you can't go on. He will give you joy when you feel discouraged. He will make a way when it looks impossible. God will make a way. He did it before, and He'll do it again. Don't let what you're going through make you forget about everything that God has brought you through and where He is taking you. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere, your glory. God is what our hearts long for, to be overcome by your presence. Lord, one thing I can confidently say, no matter what life throws at me, I'm going to be okay. Not because I've got me, but because I've got God. We are eternal. Our spirit can never die or be destroyed. We are fellow travelers in the game of life. This makes us all brothers and sisters in the grand plan of creation. All one in the eyes of God. I've always been someone who looks too deep into something or someone. That's because I realized from a young age that there's always more than what meets the eye. After the earth dies, some 5 billion years from now, after it is burnt to crisp or even swallowed by the sun, there will be other worlds and stars and galaxies coming into existence, and they will know nothing of place once called Earth. According to the reptilian conspiracy, shape-shifting reptilian alien species control Earth by taking on human form and gaining political power to manipulate human societies and eventually divide and destroy us. They probably belong to the shape-shifting Secret Service agents of the Illuminati reptilian bloodline. A 2018 survey revealed that 12 million Americans believe reptilians. Man is the most insane species. Worships an invisible God and slaughters a visible nature without realizing the nature. He slaughters is this invisible God that he worships. Did you know? This mummy of a small child is estimated to be around 3,500 years old and was discovered on an excavation at the Theban necropolis, near Luxor, capital city of Kemet. His features are obvious. In 2015, Christians were appalled after a Baphomet statue was displayed with admiring children standing by, but then took their admiring children to watch a Disney movie with a Baphomet-looking beast cursed by a witch in 2017. There's a cave in Belize where you can see the remains of ancient Maya human sarcophaguses, but you have to swim in, wade up a cave river, and cruel Eval dark, ansempt uneven rock to mash the back of the cave civium. There, you can walk among the many corpses of sacrifice victim, including the Crystal Maiden, an 18-year-old whose skeleton is so calified it's sparkly this Tocharian female Issa Tarim Basin mummy who lived around 1.000 BC. She was Tal, with a high nose and long flaxen blonde hair, perfectly preserved in ponytails. The weave of her clothing appears similar to Celtic cloth. She was around 40 years old when she died. 1,000-year-old bones represent oldest tsunami victims in East Africa. 1,000 years ago, a thriving early Swahili village bustled on the banks of Tanzania's Pangani Rivet, a few miles inland from the Indian Ocean. A great wave of unpredicted tsunami submerged an ancient fishing village in present-day Tanzania. The villagers evidently had no chance to escape the torrent that overtook them. Many drowned in their raised homes and were buried in the wreckage. Did you know? Makunik is a remote region that was once home to ancient dwarfs. Here's a normal-sized boy next to a dwarf's abode. The Nenet people are reindeer herders native to Siberta that have survived 50-degree temperatures for over 1,000 years. They depend heavily on their reindeer herds, using Tom for food, clothing, tools, transportation, and more as they migrate more than 1,000 kilometers across the tundra every year. Planes used to be a lot more comfortable. In the 1940s, the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser had reclining club chairs throughout the cabin. On intercontinental flights, every seat could be adjusted into a bed, so each passenger Mexico abolished slavery in 1829. Slaveholders in the U.S. knew that enslaved people were escaping to Mexico. The U.S. tried to get Mexico to sign a fugitive slave treaty and wanted Mexico to return escaped enslaved people to the U.S. But Mexico refused to sign such a treaty, insisting that all enslaved people were free once they set foot on Mexican soil. Ivan Mishukov, a Russian boy who was raised by a pack of dogs from age 4, 6. His pack defended him from police 3 times before they tricked the pack and captured him. At the 1904 Summer Olympics, American gymnast George Iser fared quite well. He won SS medals, 3 gold in long hor vault, 25 rope climb, oar and parallel FTR row bars, 2 silver in the 4 event all-around and pommel horse, and 1 bronze medal in the horizontal bar. While winning 6 medals in the Olympics is quite an ace accomplishment for anyone, what makes Iser even more unique is that he competed with a wooden leg. During his youth, Iser lost most of his left leg after a train ran over it. This, however, didn't stop him from making his story a few years later, becoming the only person to compete in the Olympic Games with an artificial leg until 2008, when South African swimmer Nathalie Dutoit competed in the Beijing Olympics. Archaeologists unearthed a 5700-year-old chewing gum in what was once a small fishing village in Denmark. As it was preserved well under layers of silt and sand, the entire genome of the woman who chewed it was reconstructed, and this is what she looked like. Slaves were forbidden from owning drums, as they were used to communicate. New Orleans was the only city where slaves could legally own them. Hundreds of slaves were allowed to gather each Sunday to trade, sing, dance, and play music. This led to the birth of jazz. Back in slavery days in Jamaica, during a slave's menstrual cycle, this is what she would wear. It was padded to prevent leakage. This piece of cloth was known as drawers, or the blood cloth. When the slave girls would wash and hang their panties to dry, plantation owners would see it as an eyesore. Occasionally they would yell, "Move your blood clothy over time." This word became synonymous with angry cursing. Abraham Lincoln is in the Wrestling Hall of Fame, losing only 1 out of about 300 matches, and once challenged an entire crowd of onlookers after dispatching an opponent. "I'm the big buck of this lick. If any of you want to try it, come on and what you're home." A Viking woman could divorce her husband for many reasons, including insulting her, being too jealous, not sleeping with her, or wearing effeminate clothing, especially low-necked shirts exposing his chest. One of the most unexplained places on the earth is Lake Killock, Canada. It's the most mineral-rich lake of the world. Each of these spots hold a unique chemical composition and are said to cure different diseases. If I'm not a baby until I'm born, explain this verse to me. "Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." Nigerian prophet by name, Daniel Abadonrin felt inspired by the story of Daniel in the Bible and decided to recreate the story. He went into a cage in a zoo where lions were kept with the belief that God would shut their mouths. As soon as he entered, he was completely devoured by the lions. On February 27, 2015, Dalen Pua set out to go hiking on a trail in Hawaii known as the Stairway to Heaven, despite of being warned that the trail is forbidden by his grandmother. This is the last photo he sent to family and appears to show a figure of man crouched in the foliage. Neither Dalen nor his body was ever found. In the original script, when Han Solo is about to be frozen in carbonite, he was supposed to say, "I love you too," in response to Layla saying she loved him. However, Empire Strikes Back director Irvin Kershner and Harrison Ford both thought this was out of character for Solo, with no ultimately being improvised on set. The Glamis Castle is one of the renowned historic castles in Scotland. It is over 600 years old, and the appeal is immediately obtained when you see the towers, statues, turrets, and spires. It has been termed one of Scotland's most haunted castles. And the most notable ghost is the monster of Glamis, who is rumored to be a deformed child who was kept locked up inside his bedroom for his entire life. There were real-life hobbit people ironing on an Indonesian island 18,000 years age. Fully grown adults were only about 3 feet tall. Studies show they were likely a result of insular dwarfism, where species trapped on an island shrink in size. The same island was so once inhabited by miniature elephants. There's a long history in Japan of female pearl divers who start diving at the age of 12, 13, and are active well into their 70s. They're known as ama, which means sea woman. They endure freezing conditions and great pressure from deep-sea depths to get pearls, and they have a unique technique in which they release air in a long whistle as they resurface. Henry IV demanded a ransom of 150,000 marks for the release of Richard the Lionheart. Richard's brother John and the King of France offered 80,000 marks to keep him imprisoned. In a 1070 experiment, a Saitantard Pachingat and 7 otter mentally Hilmi Parmalpania get memserves admitted to 12 Furent Pachiat Hongpittals across the U.S. by pretending to hear Vianises. Once made, they began acting normally, but all 12 hospitals diagnosed each of them with disorders, forced them to take drugs, and required them all to attest they had a diawaste before they could be res. For those who didn't understand, these are the remains of a tree. The diameter of the stump is about 2 miles, and the presumed height of the tree is about 10 miles. You can keep scrolling through the feed. Nothing. Interesting, think about it. According to the accounts written down on the Sumerian king list, 8 ancient kings ruled over ancient Mesopotamia for a period of 241,200 years before the Great Flood. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridug. In Eridug, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28800 years. The first documented case of child abuse was reported to an animal welfare organization for lack of a better resource, which means that animals had welfare rights in the U.S. before children did. Jewish communities had lower death rates during the 14th CI Black Death due to their hygienic practices. This in part inspired a wave of anti-Semitic violence in Christian Europe, where some communities attributed the pandemic to a Jewish conspiracy without gravity. Golden orb weaver spiders were able to start attacking their prey in any direction. Their speed and predatory nature suddenly became supernatural on the space shuttle, and we barely understand why. Despite being a millionaire, Steve Jobs only paid $500 a month in child support to his daughter Lisa, a girl he named a computer after, but attempted to deny paternity for. By definition, a tramp is someone who only works when they're forced to. A bum doesn't work at all, and a hobo is a traveling worker. At least 45% of people under the age of 30 would like to send American troops to fight ISIS, but wouldn't themselves be willing to go. Although it sounds incredible that people have survived falls from aircraft as high as 20,000 feet, the extreme height makes little difference as anything above 10 or 12 stories, and you've reached terminal velocity, so a fall from 20,000 is no different from a 500-foot fall. Frequent daydreamers are likely to be more inelegant and creative. Studying AF mental subens found that wardering minds are associated with orderlies thinking and more efficient train activity. Researchers think daydreamers can grasp concepts so quickly and easily that they can't help getting lay lost in other thoughts once they understand what's happening in their Q-ment environment. An American POW in Osaka, a British soldier who fought in both world wars, was shot in the face, head, ankle, leg, hip, and ear, survived a plane crash, tunneled out of a POW camp, and bit off his own fingers when a doctor wouldn't amputate them. He later said, "Frankly, I had enjoyed the war." Huacachina, Peru. In the midst of one of the driest climates in the world is an oasis town with lush palm trees, flourishing foliage, and a tranquil lagoon which is said to have curative properties. just deserts. Nestled in one of Earth's driest locations is Huacachina, a town complete with trees, hotels, shops, and even its very own oasis library. The magical town is called Huacachina, and it can be found not only on adventurers' bucket lists, but also in a barren desert in Peru. Hans and Margaret Ray, two Jews, fled Paris in 1940 on bicycles Hans had built. They escaped just hours before the Nazis seized Paris. Among the few possessions they carried was the catraded manuscript of the first Curious George book, which they would later get published in New York. The nickname Buffalo Soldiers began with the Cheyenne War Riors in 1867. The actual Cheyenne translation was Wild Buffalo. The nickname was given out of respect and because of the fierce fighting ability of the 10th Cavalry. Over time, Buffalo Soldiers became a generic term for all African American soldiers. There is an ancient practice known as eye-gazing, whereby two participants stare into each other's eyes for an extended period of time. When eye contact between two people is initiated and maintained, an invisible energetic circuit is established, and it is known to induce euphoria, visions, past life experiences, and even remote viewing. From here, it is possible to reach a higher state of consciousness. The saying, "eyes are the window to the soul," has much more meaning than we may realize. Siblings home within a year of each other are called Irish twins, which was a derogatory term referring to poor Catholic families with many successive children. Joseph Bazalgette, an English civil engineer who designed the sewer network for central London in the 1860s, said, "We're only going to do this once and there's always the unforeseen," and doubled the diameter of the pipes. Had he not done this, the city's sewers would have overflowed in the 1960s, but they are still in use today. NASA satellite imagery shows that the U.S. Belt, at peak production in July, produces oxygen levels 40% greater than those observed in the Amazon rainforest. Michael Phelps has 28 Olympic medals. 23 of them are gold. Not only is he the most decorated Olympian, he has more medals than 91 other countries and more gold medals than 108 countries. Olympic countries' gold medal count more than 5 fewer than Prealps. In 1947, explorer Richard Byrd was ordered by the U.S. government to remain silent about what he witnessed during his Arctic assignment. He claims in a diary that he met an ancient underground race at the South Pole. Years later, in fear of others finding inhabitants, 12 countries signed the Antarctic Treaty to protect that region. In 2014, Harvard University discovered that 2 books inside their library, which were from the mid-1880s, were actually bound together using human skin. One of the books, named Destinies of the Soul, was written by Dr. Ludovic Bouland. In the book, Dr. Bouland wrote a note which explained, "A book about the human soul deserved to have a human covering. Gordon Ramsay set up a business inside a London prison which allows prisoners how baked goods, which are sold on the outside, providing the prison with financial support and giving the prisoners the culinary skills and work experience they need in order to get honest work after their sentence." The King James Version of the New Testament. The King James Version of the New Testament was completed in 1611 by 8 members of the Church of England. There were, and still are, no original texts to translate. The oldest manuscripts we have were written down hundreds of years after the last apostle died. There are over 8,000 of these old manuscripts with no 2 alike. The King James translators used none of these anyway. Instead, they edited previous translations to create a version their king and parliament would approve. So, 21st century Christians believe the Word of God is a book edited in the 17th century from 16th century translations of 8,000 contradictory copies of 4th century scrolls that claim to be copies of lost letters. After the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster of 2011, over 500 Japanese seniors, all over the age of 60, came forward to help clean up the radioactive power station so that younger men and women don't have to risk getting exposed to such dangerous levels of radiation. They sacrificed their safety to protect the younger generation. In 1140, when an opposition castle was captured by King Conrad III, the women of the castle were granted free departure and allowed to take what they could carry on their backs. Thinking quickly, the women carried the men on their backs. The king kept his word and let the men live. In 1953, due to the high speed, the F-11 fighter shot itself as it was faster than its own bullet. A bar of iron cost $5. Made into horseshoes, it's worth $12. Made into needles, it's worth $3,500. Made into balance springs for watches, it's worth $300,000. Your value is determined by what you are able to make of yourself. A man went to the ER with a blood alcohol level of 0.37, but screw he hadn't been donking. For years, people thought he was a sluice drinker because he often became randomly drunk and claimed he didn't know why. Doctors found it that he had auto-brewery syndrome, a condition which caused intoxicating fermentation inside his stomach whenever he ate a lot of carbs. There's a rare breed of chicken where the entire chicken is solid black. The meat, skin, organs, bones, bone marrow, tongue, and eyes are solid black. Each one costs $2,500. Never forget that intelligence rules the world and ignorance carries the burden. Therefore, remove yourself as far as possible from ignorance and seek as far as possible to be intelligent. Neuroscientists prescribe video games for people with autism and Asperger's so they can practice social interaction in a safe, non-threatening environment. This eases anxiety and allows users to gain confidence and apply it in their daily lives. After becoming trapped in a World Trade Center elevator on 9/11, window washer Jan Demzour used his squeegee handle to pry open the door, cut through drywall, and escape with 5 others minutes before the tower collapsed. A coating of white drywall is still visible on the handle, which can be seen at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. The divorce rate of couples whose wedding cost more than $20,000 is 1.6 times higher than these whose wedding cost between $5,000 and $10,000, and couples who spent $1,000 or less had a lower than average rate of divorce. 20,000-year-old fossilized human footprints were discovered in Australia, which indicate the man who made them was running at the speed of a modern Olympic sprinter, barefoot in sand. In the 60s, the U.S. struck a deal with the UK to buy an unpopulated Indian Ocean island for a military base. The UK didn't have an unpopulated eastend, so it forcibly expelled the inhabitants of the British Indian Ocean. 1849, Henry Box Brown mailed himself to freedom from Richmond, Virginia, to the anti-slavery office in Philadelphia. The delivery took 26 HRS, and he later became a public speaker and abolitionist. Did you know? This object was found in 1898 in a tomb at Saqqara and was dated to 200 BC. Since in 1898 there were no such thing as airplanes, this discovery was put in a box and labeled as a bird model. When a blueprint of the object was made, it was realized that all of its highly accurate proportions were present in ratios of 2, 1 or 3, 1. Suggesting that the model was the result of much calculation and experimentation. Share this video if you love God. Subscribe this channel for more blessings. Type yes if you believe. In 1140, when an opposition castle was captured by King Conrad III, the women of the castle were granted free departure and allowed to take what they could carry on their backs. Thinking quickly, the women carried the men on their backs. The king kept his word and let the men live. In 1953, due to the high speed, the F-11 fighter shot itself as it was faster than its own bullet. A bar of iron cost $5. Made into horseshoes, it's worth $12. Made into needles, It's worth $3,500. Made into balanced springs for watches, it's worth $300,000. Your value is determined by what you are able to make of yourself. A man went to the ER with a blood alcohol level of 0.37, but screw, he hadn't been donking. For years, people thought he was a sluice drinker because he often became randomly drunk and claimed he didn't know why. Doctors found it that he had autobrewery syndrome, a condition which caused intoxicating fermentation inside his stomach whenever he ate a lot of carts. There's a rare breed of chicken where the entire chicken is solid black. The meat, skin, organs, bones, bone marrow, tongue, and eyes are solid black. Each one costs $2,500. Never forget that intelligence rules the world and ignorance carries the burden. Therefore, remove yourself as far as possible from ignorance and seek as far as possible to be intelligent. Neuroscientists prescribe video games for people with autism and Asperger's so they can practice social interaction in a safe, non-threatening environment. This eases anxiety and allows users to gain confidence and apply it in their daily lives. After becoming trapped in a World Trade Center elevator on 9/11, window washer John Dempsey used his squeegee handle to pry open the door, cut through drywall, and escape with 5 others minutes before the tower collapsed. A coating of white drywall is still visible on the handle, which can be seen at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. The divorce rate of couples whose wedding cost more than $20,000 is 1.6 times higher than these whose wedding cost between $5,000 and $10,000, and couples who spent $1,000 or less had a lower than average rate of divorce. 20,000-year-old fossilized human footprints were discovered in Australia, which indicate the man who made them was running at the speed of a modern Olympic sprinter, barefoot in sand. In the 60s, the U.S. struck a deal with the UK to buy an unpopulated Indian Ocean island for a military base. The UK didn't have an unpopulated Osteen, so it forcibly expelled the inhabitants of the British Indian Ocean. 1849, Henry Box Brown mailed himself to freedom from Richmond, Virginia, to the anti-slavery office in Philadelphia. The delivery took 26 HRS, and he later became a public speaker and abolitionist. Did you know? This object was found in 1898 in a tomb at Saqqara and was dated to 200 BC. Since in 1898 there were no such thing as airplanes, this discovery was put in a box and labeled as a bird model. When a blueprint of the object was made, it was realized that all of its highly accurate proportions were present in ratios of 2, 1 or 3, 1, suggesting that the model was the result of much calculation and experimentation. Share this video if you love God. Subscribe this channel for more blessings.